Hello everyone. So we are going to be working on GA4 today, and I want to just highlight a few differences and similarities between GA4 and Universal Analytics, and we will then go through how I recommend you approach setting up your tracking for GA4. Because the tool itself is very different to Universal Analytics, its predecessor, my approach is to treat it as a brand new tool because that's exactly what it is. There are similarities between Universal Analytics and GA4, but I can guarantee you there are more differences that are going to come up and creep up behind you. So I recommend doing it in this approach that we're going to cover today. Before we kind of jump into measurement, I do want to introduce GA4 as there are some nuances with the tool that you may or may not be aware of, and then we'll kind of get our hands dirty and jump in. So firstly, I want to introduce the topic of streams. So Google Analytics 4, unlike Universal Analytics, allows us to combine data from iOS, from our websites, from Android, and all of these are known as streams. So essentially, all these streams get consolidated into a Google Analytics 4 property. Um, so it'd be something like this, your structure. And of course, you can have as many or as few streams as you want. If you only have a website, it would just be a single website stream nested inside of a Google Analytics property. Now, because we have multiple streams, it's crucial that we have unity or at least parity between how we track events. And this is where sort of measuring makes a big difference. Um, Universal Analytics, we had two types of essentially of data, two pieces of data that we could send in and two specific types. So we could have a page view and we could have an event. And they were considered very different. Now, if you think about apps today, there's really no concept of a page view. That's not really a thing. So Google Analytics 4 has built in, it's built a bit better in that it's not a page view or an event. They're just saying everything is an event, and you can have an event that is a page view, that is named page view. And this is how GA4 generally works. So we have events that are named page view, and we have events that we can name however we want. It's very different to Universal Analytics and the concept of events. Here, you get full freedom on how you want to name your event and what data goes in with that event. And I'll show you an example of this in a second. So yeah, the data that belongs to an event is called an event parameter. So I'm just going to show you an example. Like let's say we wanted to track a sign up, and something that we wanted to track about the sign up was the lead form name. So the form that was filled out for the sign up to occur. And it could be that you sign up from different places. So we could send an event like this where the event name is sign up, and then lead form name, that is our custom event parameter. I have named that myself, and we are adding that, and now that belongs to the event, and Google Analytics can receive that, which is very cool. Now, for those thinking about e-commerce, or if you have an e-com business, you do have specific, this new items object, and this is where essentially your product data would go. And then you have all of these other parameters that you can send in that are going to be recognized by the UI. What's very interesting is now you have very specific names you have to use for the UI to pick them up. So purchase, of course, would be a purchase, and this is the data that can be sent in with it, which is very different to how it was previously. You also have the ability of setting a user ID. So there's two types of data that can be sent in with events or generally into GA4, and that is event level data. So as we saw, the event parameter that belongs to the event, and there is user level data, which is, for example, something that should follow that user around for as long as possible. And this is how you would do that with the GTag library. I will talk about implementations on Google Tag Manager in a second. Cool. All right, so I'm just going to introduce the topic of a measurement plan first, and you should have this template available to you. So please make a copy and you can enter data in here. And the way to use this is you'll type in your event name that you would like to track. It's going to automatically create the GA4 event name in the structure with the underscore that is needed. You put in your event description, you say when it should fire, and then you put the parameters in here as well. And this is going to be things that your developer can then pick up and potentially help you implement. But this is a good central location. So if you have multiple devices, Android, iOS, or web, everyone's going to know, okay, well, the event should say sign up, and the data that should pertain to that event is, lead form name or user ID. And this is crucial. So first step before you even start this is figure out what do you want to track, put it in here, what belongs to that event, what do you want, how do you want to go about that and move forward. And I've also got a parameters section where you can expand on each of these parameters. So for example, the lead form name, this is an event. So it belongs to, it's an event level parameter. So we can define that, and that just means it belongs to the event, but the user ID should follow the person around, so it's a user base. And there's only these two types currently. There's no session level, which is what existed in Universal Analytics. I do feel that will come, but it hasn't come as of yet. I've put in some other information like high, low priority. This is things that your developer may need if he's prioritizing things or not. Again, this is not essential. It's just something I like doing. And then in here, you've got sort of some documentation from Google. And then I've got sort of some limitations that would be important to understand. And just on the topic of limitations, why we need to approach Google Analytics 4 a bit more strategically is because we have event limitations. We have limitations on how many of these can exist. So these event parameters, which will turn into what's known as custom dimensions. We also have limitations on the name and how long that name can be. So you'll see I've got a bit of a formula here just to give you an indication if you've gone over the character limit. So you can type in your event name here and this should auto-populate for you and let you know if you're going over. And these limitations, I've linked an article that you saw in there, and it'll just show you that these are the correct character limits and what you can do. And it's good for you to know this prior to building out your measurement plan. Cool. I'll jump back into the deck and let's just talk through the ways to implement this. So now let's assume you did fill that out. You were clear on what we wanted to track. You understood how conceptually how we're going to track these, what are user level, user properties as they're known, like the user ID, and what are event parameters that belong to the event. And now it was time to either give this to the developer or to move forward with it. So there's two ways to implement. One is using the G tag library, which I'm going to show you in a second. But essentially, this is given to us, and we can find this within our Google Analytics 4 account. We give this to developer to put onto the site, and then every time an event occurs, the developer adds one line of code or several lines of code, similar to what you see over here. So every time there's an event, this would fire. And essentially, it's up to you, but the developer could fire page views separately as well, or this code can be set up to automatically track page views, events of type page view. And I'll show you all of this in a second as well. The other option is, of course, using Google Tag Manager, which I believe is the preferred option. And over here, you just have two types of tags. You've got a configuration tag where you kind of just initialize GA4, and then you've got each of the events you fire. And what they've done, very nice of them, is in the configuration tag, you can switch on a toggle that says send a page view as well. And this is very helpful for everyone working from a universal analytics world where you would just put the code on the site and that was that. This can do that as well. So it's literally put the configuration tag to fire and then have specific events fire out when they need to. The one difference is this library, this tag, previously you would fire it on all pages. Now you fire it on initialization because this needs to be the first thing that fires as it has some extra information that may be needed later on. If you make a mistake, it's not detrimental. The library should be smart enough to try and figure it out, but it's definitely preferred to do it this way as this holds some configuration that you cannot do in every other event. Cool. So we've gone through the measurement plan. We're kind of ready to implement. Before we do that, we need to have our Google Analytics 4 account created. So let's go ahead and pop in and create one. So what I've done over here is I've gone into my existing Google Analytics account. So if you have Universal Analytics, just make sure you're nested in here and just go ahead and hit Create Property. And in here, it's going to ask you a property name. I generally do this and I put GA4 and I'm just going to put Growth Runner just for example's sake. And you can go ahead and hit next. Well, you can have a look at the advanced options, but all it's going to do is it's going to allow you to create universal analytics if you need it, which I highly don't recommend because that's going to be deprecated in no time. Let's go ahead and next. You can choose the options or you can just hit create. And once we have our property, now we need to set up our event streams. So you're seeing that what's happened is it's already taken us into the data stream section. And in here, we can choose which of these we're going to work with. So as I mentioned, you can have multiple data streams into one GA4 property. For our example, we're just going to click on web, and I'm just going to go ahead and set up a dummy site, and I'm going to call it GA4 Growth Runner and I'm just going to indicate it's web, so it's easy for us to identify. Now, once this is created, I'm just going to close this down and show you where it's at. So again, inside of data streams, now we have a data stream. And if we were to click on this, it's going to give us information about what's going to happen. First and foremost, the important thing is this measurement ID. And this is crucial for Tag Manager and for G tag as well. But G tag, you can copy your tag, and I'll show you that in a second. You'll see this enhanced measurement section, which is puzzling. What's happening is Google has adopted this. You can have the GA4 automatically try and figure out what's happening on your site. So it's going to pay attention to clicks, external clicks from your website. It's going to track them. Scrolls will be tracked. Page views it'll try and track as well, and a few others. And you can go ahead and customize this and switch this on or off. If you are a single page application and you have a developer firing what's known as a virtual page view, just make sure you switch off the page change based on browser events, as it's going to cause some crazy amount of data for you. Everyone else, if you're unsure if you're on a single page application or not, you're welcome to leave this unchanged. Yeah, and you can switch these on as you need. I'm just going to leave them on for now. And if we scroll down into configuration of your tag, this is where you can actually obtain the, sorry, wrong one, view tag instructions. This is where you can obtain your tag. So this is the G tag approach, not Google Tag Manager's approach. If you're using G tag, then this would be given to your developer or similar, and they would go ahead and implement this. If you're using Tag Manager, and we're probably going to do an example with Tag Manager, I would just copy the measurement ID and I would be on my way. So inside of Tag Manager, again, this is a container that I had. The way I would set this up is I would click on New Tag, Tag Configuration, and over here you'll see the new options for GA4. We're going to start off with a configuration tag, which is where we can specify the measurement ID, and I copied the one that I showed you a second ago and pasted it in here. I'm going to leave the send a page view event when the configuration loads. As I mentioned, this is just so it's parity with Universal Analytics. Every time Google Tag Manager loads on your page, it's going to fire a page view, which is desired for many people. And then we're going to click on triggering, and I'm going to look for initialization, and I'm going to set it on this one. I'm not going to change the name. I'm just going to use the default for now, and go ahead and hit save. And my tag manager is not happy with me. I'm just going to quickly refresh. And let's try that one more time. I'm just going to name it config. And here we go. So we've got our first configuration tag firing, and this will fire page views as well. If you wanted to track an event as well as this, you would go ahead and hit new event, tag configuration. And again, in this case, I'm going to select event. And What it does automatically is it says, please tell me what is your configuration tag. And that's the one we just configured. So we say GA4 config. And notice now we do not need to specify the measurement ID or anything. And if we follow our measurement plan, we want to track sign up. And then the other thing we wanted was this lead form name. And we wanted that. So I'm not going to go into too much detail, but your event parameters would go in here. So you could say, lead form name, and you would essentially find the variable that was needed for this. I'm just going to type one in manually. And then if you wanted user data like the user ID or similar, that's where you would put in into user properties. User properties for Tag Manager differs a little bit to GTag in that all of the user properties are things that belong to the user. Well, they're essentially the same thing, but the difference is the user ID for some reason goes into event parameters. So over here we could have something like the user, well, the LTV, lifetime value, and again, you could reference a variable inside your data layer that you could take this from. And we could specify the user ID over here. And again, we take the variable from the data layer itself. We would trigger this wherever it needed to be triggered. And just for example's sake, I'm going to find a random event, or I don't have one, but assuming we would do this, we would just choose a custom event. And let's say our developer called it sign up as well. My OCD kicks off every now and again. And over here, I would just type GA4 event sign up, for example, and save that. And these are sort of the two ways that we could configure. We have a config tag, which includes page views in our instance, and then we've got specific events. If you had a single page application, you would create an event of type page view, and you would send in something like the page title and the page location, and that would then send that over to GA4. Cool. So we've kind of gone through the implementation, we've gone through the measurement plan. The next step is to kind of look at the data set inside of GA4. And I do want to mention one thing before we kind of probe into the data, and that is that even though, so for our previous example, sign up, even though we're sending in lead form name, and that's clearly going to GA4, it doesn't mean we can report on it just yet. And the reason this is imagine you had a scenario where your developer put 150 different parameters here, and that was just generically done, but you didn't really need to report on everything. You would need to cherry pick which of these you're interested in. And GA4 has this, and it's not communicated as nicely as I'd like it to be, but essentially you need to activate each of these to be able to use them. And let's go ahead and go into the UI real quick. So you'll find this configure section, which is where we're going to start. And in here, you're just going to go into custom definitions. And for our example, we're going to go ahead and click create custom dimensions. And here is where we would enable the specific parameter. So in our case, lead form name would need to be enabled over here. And a lot of the times when you hit the drop down, if you've had data being collected, you're going to see the events here. If you haven't, you're going to have to type it in. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to just name it exactly the same. Now this is good because you can change up the dimension name. This is what the event parameter is that's feeding from it. But if this was named really badly, you could name it whatever you wanted over here. So you could just say form name. If that was, how you wanted to name it, maybe you could put a description in, and that would just make it a lot easier for everyone. Scope is just saying where this belongs. So is it an event parameter or is it a user property? So in our case, it's an event parameter. And let's say we were also sending in lifetime value. We could go ahead and click here. We could type in, lifetime value, for example, and we would switch the scope to user scope. And you'll see over here, it's changed to user property. So in our case, previously we were sending an LTV. Just type it in there and go ahead and hit save. And now we've got 2 of these tracking. And I should mention there is a limit on these as well. So this is why the measurement plan makes a lot of sense, and that approach is very much start over there and then start populating this account. So let's have a walkthrough of the actual sections. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a demo account that has some data, and that might be easier for us to navigate. Let me just pop in. So I'm just going to pop into recent, and we're going to use the GA4, the Google Merchant Store, and that's where we're going to start our journey. So I'm going to click on home, which is where you would usually start your journey when you selected your GA4 account. And this home section is a bit of a summary section. Notice that the insights panel is now coming in with machine learning. So it's telling you anything that could be important, which is very, very cool. And over here, you just have the usual trend, and you've got a bit of real-time data coming through here. I'm going to start off in the reporting section, which is probably one of the more useful ones. And this is where we have predefined reports that we can refer to. You've got a bit of a home section of a snapshot. And the really good thing about GA4 is all of this is customizable. So you can change up everything you want to see. If you don't like these menus over here, you can change them up as well. And I just want to pop into acquisition and traffic acquisition, which is arguably one of the more important events reports that GA4 packs. So over here, you're going to see that we've got our data as we used to have in Universal Analytics in the channels detail. So firstly, it's really unfortunate, but Google Analytics has session default channel grouping as well as just default channel grouping. If you're looking for the equivalent match with Universal Analytics, it's always going to be session default channel grouping. The same way, if you're looking for source medium, it's going to be session source, session medium. And this is just one of the caveats that GA4 has. I've also got a little section in here of all the other caveats, as I mentioned before. I know it's my own website. I don't mean to plug, but definitely have a read of this. I've just compiled everything on all the forums of these sort of nuances that tripped me up when I was working through this. If you scroll to the right, you're also going to see there's this new section called conversions. And conversions are similar to goals in Universal Analytics, but this is when you have an event that is important that you want to report on, that you want to know where, you want to report on it in a bit more detail. And by default, purchase is always included, and then the rest of them you can specify in the configuration and mark events as conversions. So if we think about an e-commerce business, maybe signing up to the newsletter is considered a conversion as well as a purchase. Maybe you consider, starting checkout as a potential conversion, and that's something you want to share with Google Ads. You can do that as well if you link the accounts. I won't go through all of this. I'm just going to go into the real time, and then I'm going to show you the explore section as well. Real time is very cool. They've improved this a lot in my opinion, and you're getting a lot more granular data of what's going on. So you've got the page views, and again, these page title and all of this, they call them views now, not page views specifically. And this is essentially if you have a page view or a screen view event coming in, this is what's going to be shown. You've got your events that are firing. So in our case, we had sign up. We'd probably see sign up firing over here. And if you have marked one of these events as a conversion, then they're going to show you the conversions in a separate section. And what's really cool is I'm just going to click on one of these, and you're going to be able to see the event parameters that are being sent through as well. And you're going to be able to click into those. So it's very cool in that I could click into, well, I'm just going to click into clean event, whatever that is. And ideally, this should have some data in here, which is very, very cool. In that when you are debugging, you can do this. And as well as that, in the configure section, there's a debugger, a standalone debugger that if you are using Google Tag Manager and you have preview mode enabled, you should see a live stream of your events come through here, which is very, very useful. And I'm going to select a device. These are everyone that is sort of doing a debug view, but you'll see, and I'm just going to scroll down, you're going to see live events and you're going to see parameters come in. And this is just fantastic for debugging. And the other section that is crucial and really important is this Explore feature. Previously in Universal Analytics, you had this Explore feature, but it is only for paid accounts. So it's very cool that they're giving this to us for free. And I'll just show you how to use it because it was a little tricky, in my opinion, when I started. And the way this works is you need to you need to tell Google Analytics for what you want to use, what dimensions you're interested in, and then you sort of drag them onto your report and then you'll see your visualization. It's a little counterintuitive. So let's say we wanted to see sessions by device. So I could just type in device here. I should have a device category. And I'll go ahead and put import. The really cool thing is you can select multiple of these. So if I wanted device and let's say I wanted session default channel grouping, I could go ahead and activate these two. And just to show you that I'm not lying to you, I'm going to show you default channel grouping, and you're going to see that there's default channel grouping and session default channel grouping. When in doubt, always use session. And unfortunately, I'm going to show you that for source, you have very much the same thing. You've got session source somewhere buried around here, and you've also got source. And source really only applies to conversion events. Session source is the one that you really want. So slightly off topic, but believe me, that is crucial information. And in terms of metrics, again, metrics are all the numbers associated to this. So we could have users, we could pull in, I'm just going to use active users and total users, and I'm going to do sessions and sessions and engage sessions, for example. Let's say these are the things that I wanted to potentially use in my reports. I would activate them first and then I would produce the report. And in the report, you've got rows, columns, and values. Generally, you put the numbers and values, and then you put the rows, well, you put your dimensions inside of rows or categories, and it's going to give you this report. If I wanted to make this, you can also double click, I should mention, you can double click on a specific dimension, it's going to add it into rows, and you can double click on a metric and it's going to add it into values, which speeds things up. But let's say I wanted to also see, sort of split this out into two different dimensions, I could perfectly do this. So I've got, my session channel default grouping here, and then I've got my categories across. And you can export these very easily. I think this, because this is Google's merchant store, you can't, but over here you'd have a little drop down that you could import exports from. And if you wanted to share this with other people on the account, so in GA4, essentially this report belongs to you now. If you wanted to share it with more people, you would just click this little button and it would share a read-only version with people. Now I should mention, like this, you don't have to have multiple reports. You have sub reports that you can put in here. So essentially these tabs that belong to this report. So they call them explorations if you wanted to explore many things. So I could say views and devices, for example. And over here, I could rename this to whatever I want and, page data. And I could activate new dimensions and produce other reports. And although I'm just doing sort of free-form reports, you could perfectly well turn this into a chart. So I'm just going to scroll back up here. I'm going to do a chart, and let's say we wanted to know our sessions over time. So we could granularly look at this on a day basis, and we've got free built-in anomaly detection to kind of let you know if something looks out of it, and you can change up the sensitivity. And of course, you can filter all of this data. So the tool itself gives us a lot more flexibility, gives us a lot more that we can do with it, which is essential, as you can imagine. I do recommend that the approach be that you decide on what you want to track before you start tracking it, because the event limitations are fairly heavy. For example, you have a number of custom dimensions that you can enable. So it's 25 custom, they call them custom definitions, but it's 25 metrics and 25 dimensions, so a total of 50. You've got a limitation on how many event parameters. So those were the things that belong to the event. How many event parameters can be sent in with each event? If you're on the free version, that's 25. You've also got character limits on the numbers on essentially the name of the events as well as the values. And all of that can be found in the documentation, and you'll see that the event, the parameters itself are 25 total parameters. The length of the event name is 40 characters, and the values for all of the parameters are 100. And this is crucial because if it starts cutting your data, it could group it a little bit different. And I just want to mention one more thing, that this explore section has more accurate data than inside of the reports that we saw previously, the predefined reports. So always cross-check your data in this section, because if you have some dimensions that have lots of values, so high cardinality dimensions, they are going to report very differently in each of these two. So yeah, I think that's it from me. Feel free to copy this template, give it a go, and yeah, best of luck with your GA4 tracking.